Yeah, you're very welcome along to the polling station. No Paul Christian Murphy this week, but we do have Neil Channing and we do have William Kedjanyi. I'm Johnny Ward, and we're going to talk about another week of survival for Boris Johnson, indeed, whose odds of impending exit as PM are on the drift. William Kedjanyi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Glad to be back.
How are you, Neil? I heard you on Racing TV during the week talking about whether or not you'd ever had a cigarette.
Yeah, God knows how we got onto that. I can't really remember what happened, but several people texted me afterwards and said you seem to be talking about cigarettes a lot. I don't know. I went on to some kind of stream of consciousness as usual.
Yeah, well, if you're on a midweek kind of stint on Racing TV, I mean, you do have ample time to talk about life in general, I guess.
Yeah, they said that there was only Carlisle on, and they needed someone to fill a lot of time, and I seem like the obvious person.
William, I mean, why could they think that?
I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea. Neil's constantly a professional with a.
For fans of me on Racing TV, tune in on Sunday morning this week, by the way.
Ooh, beautiful. You're back again on Sunday.
I know. I'm over the Racing TV. I don't know what it is. They've suddenly decided they really need to see a lot of me this week.
Well, there you go. There's a Sunday morning trifecta sorted. Ridge, Rayworth, Channing.
I think it's because he's very good and people like listening to you, actually, to be honest.
Oh, bless.
Yeah. So, okay, William, we have any sort of betting revisions. I know we're going to talk to Neil about this. He's been betting on the exchanges, but Boris Johnson 8th to lead by the end of March and 11 to 8 strong odds against to be gone by the 30th of June. We have what might be called a convenient distraction for Boris in the Ukraine, which might sound bonkers, but I actually kind of think that it is. But he just does seem a little bit more secure with every passing week.
Yeah, I think the immediate danger appears to have calmed down. We did previously have a market on whether there would be a confidence vote by the end of this month. That's gone, but last point it was something like, I think it was 5-4 yes, 4-7 no. I think that the danger appears to be more in the future now. I think those Tory MPs who have their doubts about his leadership, and that's still a great number, are cooling off on the timing. They don't appear to have the momentum that they used to, and any sort of big seismic event which could topple him, it appears to be likely. It appears that the window is passed. Punters are thinking that too. That's probably a reflection in the gap between those prices. You'd need a big push to get him out by March or April, but by end of June, there's lots of things that could take him down. And very crucially, the polling appears to be getting no better.
Well, and we've all had all these bizarre sort of suggestions or even allegations of the role of his wife in his politics and in his life. A lot of innuendo about that. He said there last week, or was it the week before anyway, after the Gray report, he said, I know what the problem is. I am going to fix it. Do you genuinely, like from a political viewpoint, do you have any kind of hope that Boris actually will kind of learn from his mistakes of 2021 and suddenly become a likable person and a fellow who's fit to run the country?
No,
right.
Because it hasn't happened before in his 20-year political career. And we've seen attempts at resets, I think even during his short premiership, and I don't really see it happening structurally. Yes, okay, you might create a new office of Prime Minister. You could have your back and forth about whether that might make Downing Street be a more effective operation, but it is a reflection, I think, of Johnson himself. And as for Guto Harry, we might as well have a market on him in Scaramucci's, because it's been an inauspicious start, I have to say, to his first week as communications director. I think it's bought him time with some Tory MPs, but I don't expect those changes to be what saves him.
Yeah, well, I guess that wasn't a big surprise either in terms of his own background. But Neil, what have you made of the last week?
Well, actually, just quickly on Guto, is that how you say his name? I don't know. Guto. I was looking it up to try and find out how to say it then, just before I had to say it. But somebody found that the day before yesterday, he liked a tweet that was kind of slagging Boris Johnson off, which didn't seem like a great thing to be doing in your first week of working for him. I don't know how long that will last. I'm finding it, yeah, I mean, I didn't want to go on to too much of a tangent with Cressida Dick because, I think that is quite an interesting political story, but I don't know how much effect it really has on betting. But possibly some people in the market might be thinking that the absence of a head of the Metropolitan Police at the moment makes it less likely that there's any great announcement imminently in terms of what kind of fines anyone in Downing Street is going to get over the parties. And so therefore, there's probably going to be a period of inertia on any kind of conclusion to the whole kind of Partygate scandal. We're in recess as well, aren't we? There's no parliament from next week. So I guess he's kind of kept his head down, hasn't he, Johnson? We haven't really seen that much of him in the last few days. And he probably felt like, apparently after the last PMQs, he was back round the tea rooms, shaking hands with people and speaking to Tory MPs. And in their parliamentary party meeting, which they have weekly, he was sort of saying that he was going to make himself much more available to backbenchers so that they could come and nag him about their personal hobby horses of any policies that they like. So that's kind of, all of that is just schmoozing, isn't it? But I definitely feel like we're in the range of, there's definitely more than 54 Tory backbenchers that want to get rid of him. But there might not be enough right now to vote no confidence. So, they don't want to go too early. There's definitely a feeling, and I think the market has accepted that as well, that, if you're a Tory backbencher, you're an ERG person or something like that, and you want to get rid of him, you want to make sure that he carries the trash out with him, that he is responsible for what we expect to be terrible local election results. And that you can come in, even if you're someone like Rishi Sunak, who's obviously been at the heart of this government, you can come in and paint yourself as a new broom and a totally new regime. And in order for that to happen, you need Boris Johnson to really carry the can and, get the blame for everything. So you can't possibly get in there before the local elections. Just on the market to go this year, since last Tuesday before PMQs, I think he was trading about 157 then on the exchanges, 1.57 to go in 2022, so about 4 to 7. And just like 2 minutes ago, he traded at 1.67, so 4 to 6. So that's a fair drift really in 1 week, considering not much has really happened since then.
Do you still expect him to go this year, Nick?
Well, I mean, the market on whether he goes before the next Tory conference, which is in the autumn, he's traded at 4 to 1 against to survive that long. He's now trading at about 5 to 4 to survive that long. So that's a more interesting one, because there is this idea that the local elections will go badly. They can use that as an excuse to get rid of him. Then they've got the summer to have a leadership contest, and then they come back in the autumn, make a strong, if it's Rishi, makes a strong speech at the conference. Then he has his budget to present. Obviously, the country's having, a lot of problems in the economy at the moment, but he did have like 20 billion in fiscal headway in the last budget, which he kept up his sleeve. He's obviously chosen to raise national insurance and freeze the income tax thresholds rather than give people any kind of, help out the sort of struggling people in the working age population. He can reverse those things in November obviously he won't be the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, but presumably he'll pick a Chancellor in his mould if it is Rishi Sunak, and then he can take us into 2023 with a more of a kind of a slightly tax cutting budget. But I mean we're a long way off we're still quite a long way off an election. Maybe he can't really do that because the economy's still suffering, and he needs to still spend money in next year's budget, and maybe he saves it up his sleeve. I mean, Linton Crosby would say you just do all that the November before the general election in May at 2024. So November 2023, you have a tax cutting budget. I don't. That's kind of my long-term view of what's going to happen.
Do you agree with that, William, that those in the Conservative Party are just kind of playing the longer game here in terms of Boris deciding that he should go, but just not yet?
Yeah, absolutely. They're also very fearful of doing what happened with May, where May won that confidence vote and got another year. Although eventually she did have to leave. I don't think they want that. It's already pretty tight in terms of timescale, looking longer term. Yes, we're a long way away from the next election, but if you're of the opinion that Johnson is now a toxic asset rather than an electoral one, do you want to give him another year and then have him take you rather close to the next general election and give anybody who's new less time to impose himself? I don't think they want to, and I think some are mindful of that.
Would you back Labour at 5-4 to get the most seats in the next election?
If it was against Boris Johnson, yes. The only thing is it's freeze on, it's not against Boris Johnson. And it looks fairly likely, something like around a 2-1 chance or whatever, that it'll be against Rishi Sunak. I do believe that he's beatable. I just think it's much harder for Labour because the bulk of their operation, the bulk of their success so far has been, look at this guy, and it's working to a point. But it's highly likely that Starmer and those around him, and I'm not saying they're not capable of doing this, but it's highly likely that they will have to come up with a new plan, a new strategy to take on a Tory leader who doesn't have the extremely obvious flaws and public backlash that Johnson is currently facing. And it's not certain to be Rishi Sunak, but it would demand something different of them, and I'd want to see that play out.
Yeah, well, Sunak 6-4, Keir Starmer 8-1 to be the next Prime Minister, which obviously implies, Neil, that there's a good chance this is going to happen. In terms of Rishi Sunak taking over, whilst the Conservatives are still in power, would you be tempted by Starmer to be the next Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think you asked me last week about Starmer. Why is he so big for next Prime Minister? And I think I kind of fumbled my reply, basically. I mean, the reason that he's kind of inverted commas so big is because there's a really good chance that the next Prime Minister comes before the next election.
Indeed.
It's 3-1 that Johnson survives. So you've got to win a 3-1 chance before you even get your bet going, and then you've got to win an election, or you've got to certainly win most seats in an election. I mean, it's 50-50 at the moment, roughly, that the next election ends in a hung parliament. And if that was to be the case, then it's quite close as to whether the other parties have got enough between them to form some kind of working coalition, or indeed, for Starmer to turn around and say, well, I'm going to have a crack at leading a minority government. That's probably more likely than a coalition. They suffered in 2015. Linton Crosby came out with Nicola Sturgeon having Ed Miliband in her pocket, and that was a very popular motif, and it seemed to put people off voting Labour. I think Labour won't want to fall for that. And because this version of the Labour Party is much more unionist, I think the idea that they would work with the SNP in any kind of formal arrangement would be quite difficult. So I think if Starmer was to be in a situation where we had a hung parliament, the Tories can't find anyone to work with them because the DUP either don't really win very many seats or aren't prepared to. Then Starmer could become the Prime Minister of a minority government. The Lib Dems, that's a difficult question as well. Even people talk about this blue wall and some of these seats in Surrey and whatever potentially falling to the Lib Dems, and obviously we had the amazing by-election result for them in North Shropshire. But actually, when you go and look at the Lib Dems and how many seats they're likely to win, even if they have sort of half of North Shropshire in lots of places, they're still only going to end up with 23 MPs or something like that, which is be a lot more than they've got right now. And it could make them the kingmakers, but I don't know. I guess after last time, they're not really going to go into coalition with the Tories. So, you know, by definition, they're either going to have some kind of confidence and supply with Labour or you know, potentially have some kind of electoral pact. But I think these things are all a bit wide open at the moment. Hard to see. I'm, you know, I've maintained my position of being quite bearish about Labour, not just because I can't stand Starmer and I think the direction of the Labour Party is taking doesn't agree with my politics. My reasons for being bearish of them are much more fundamental in terms of, you know, the voter ID, the change in the boundary changes, and also, you know, quite interesting. I was reading today about some stuff about the polling. So the polling companies in 2015 got the election completely wrong with Ed Miliband. They thought Labour were going to do a lot better. And basically, when they went back to look at where they'd made their mistake, their methodology was allowing for too much of a turnout among Labour voters, but primarily younger people. So then they adjusted things and said, right, okay, we have to accept that people under the age of 35 just don't vote in the numbers that we expect them to. And people over the age of 65 vote in even bigger numbers than we expect them to. We already had them in for a lot, but it should be closer to 90% than 75%. So they made all those adjustments. And then 2017 came round, and actually, lo and behold, loads of young people did vote because they were enthused by Jeremy Corbyn. So now they had to change their methodology again after the 2017 election because they failed to spot the hung parliament. So they went back and adjusted and said that lots of people who are now in the sort of 20 to 35 region are going to vote, and that's going to give Labour a lot more chance. You have to question whether that's still going to happen with Keir Starmer at the helm. You know, for example, if they drop the policy of free tuition fees, which I can see that's going to probably be something that they drop because it's quite expensive, and people on the Labour right were always critical about that policy under Corbyn. I don't really think that you know, if you look at the polling and you dig deep into the polls at the moment, although Labour are winning with headline figures, what's really happening is they're not really converting that many people from Tory to Labour. About 6% of Tory voters in 2019 now say that they would vote Labour. Lots of people are converting from Tory to don't know. Now, the question is, with a new Tory leader and Boris Johnson gone, would they just go back to Tory, or were they just lending their vote to Labour because of Brexit? That's a bit of a $64 million question. And then there's one other factor that people don't seem to talk about very much, which is the Brexit Party. So in the 2019 election, the Brexit Party famously didn't contest a lot of seats held by Tories, but they did contest a lot of seats held by Labour. And they're not really doing anything anymore, the Brexit Party. They're pretty uninteresting. They're not called the Brexit Party anymore, but you know what I mean. Those parties in the kind of UKIP mould, and there's two of them now, they're not really getting the votes anymore. If those people switch to the Tories, which you'd imagine they would, then there's a lot of Labour politicians in real trouble. There's 23 Labour politicians in the Midlands and the north of England where the Brexit Party vote at the 2019 election was bigger than their majority, and those include people like Yvette Cooper and Ed Miliband. Now, those people might be in real trouble in an election, even if Labour are ahead in the polls. So, yeah, I'm still very bearish. I noticed that, you know, even though Labour are, I think they were 10 points ahead in a poll I saw yesterday, they're still 5-4 to get most seats in an election. That price hasn't moved for 3 or 4 weeks now.
It's just hard to know when that'll be. Just moving on to France, Macron 4s on, Cress 6s, and Marine Le Pen 12s, William, and this election taking place the 10th of April. So we have seen, I think Macron has probably hardened a bit since we last spoke about it.
Yeah, he has. He's still got a pretty handy lead in terms of hypothetical runoffs. But Pécresse, she has risen rather sharply up the ranks, and Macron is falls on, and I think, listen, this might be all noise until we get into the thick of a proper election campaign, even though he is on manoeuvres. Going abroad to Russia, I think that was clearly, I think, pretty intended to be pretty statesmanlike. But I'm not terribly sure that it's going to be as comfortable as Falls Johnson would suggest for him. I think Pécresse and sort of her image give her a better chance than another Ratchet against Le Pen or going up against some more, who I think would have the potential at any point to blow up his own campaign. And yes, there's a gap between them in the polling, and you'd still expect Macron would win, but she has the potential to make it interesting.
What did you make of his comments actually on Russia? And there was a little bit of discrepancy between what the Russians were saying afterwards and Macron was saying afterwards. But there was a lot of criticism of his comments in the first place.
So personally, I wasn't that surprised at the comments. I think even though he went as the president of France, I think the situation now, I think many people would have him, even though he's going for election, as either joint most powerful man in Europe or the most powerful man in Europe, between him and Olaf Scholz. It looked to me to be pretty standard NATO stuff. I mean, NATO's in a bit of a hard spot here. I'm more speaking not in terms of expansion or whatever, but in terms of trying to strike the right balance between being a solid defender of what they see as the West of Europe against Russian encroachment, whilst also trying to deal with the fact that some might say they're not as strong as they used to be, and that for understandable reasons, everybody's a lot cooler about intervention. But I think personally, it was intended to play as the statesman, as the strong man, as somebody who would fight for his values. And I think there was very much an idea there. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this, of Macron being the big, strong defender of France for all French people.
What have you made of the whole thing? Like, Neil, obviously Putin's conscious of the need for, the need for energy and gas and so forth in Europe. He's conscious of where Ukraine is going. He's got a bit of leverage here. Doesn't look like Biden's entirely sure what he's up to. And Putin is probably quite happy as 100,000 soldiers amass on the Ukrainian border and do things in Belarus.
Yeah, actually, I'm finding it very confusing, the whole thing. I've read a lot about it and I've been watching the coverage, but I would be nowhere near as confident in putting myself into the minds of any of the players. I feel like it's very unlikely that there'll be a full-scale invasion of Ukraine for all the reasons that people keep stating. It's such a big country, and why would he want to do that? And Putin doesn't really have the troops to do that, and defending all that territory is impossible. And so I don't really see that happening. It feels like it's just a negotiating position that he's establishing between him and the EU. There's a hell of a lot of saber rattling from both sides. And they're going to end up sitting down and negotiating something. So I'm kind of feeling like there won't be a war, and I think a lot of the people that are calling for a war are doing it for domestic politics reasons, and they're not. I don't think they're very serious about it. I noticed that the Ukrainian politicians, whenever they speak, seem to pretty much just say, "Well, you lot shut up talking about, building up a war like it's going to happen. We'd rather you kind of took the gas out of the not the gas. That's a bad analogy. Probably took the heat out of the situation." I mean, it is. I think it's very complex, though. So that fills me full of delight that we decided the person needed for this complex negotiation is obviously Liz Truss.
What more do you want?
She gave us all a great geography lesson earlier in the week.
What have we got to wrap up for this week, William? Obviously, we haven't had that much betting moves. It's been a quiet week. Boris has survived. We'll be back next week, of course. What are we looking forward to?
So over the next week, actually, it's probably going to be more attention, I'd imagine, on events in Ukraine from a news point of view, especially as Parliament is in recess and MPs will be going home. I think they'll be sounding out their constituents about their views on things in Westminster. But that said, I think the heat has been taken out of that a bit, and the grid does look a bit lighter, and Johnson might have some more breathing space. Who's going to be the next Met Commissioner might be a story with some legs, particularly as it's a really, really big role. Listen, for many reasons, I don't think they're good. The Met is huge, not just for Londoners, but also nationally, because they run many national policing functions. So that is probably, it's about the biggest job going, right, in British current affairs, I'd say, at the moment. And I imagine there'll be some speculation of a Cressida Dick's replacement.
If you're pricing it up and you don't put a price on Ted Hastings, you're not doing the job correctly.
Yeah, fair comment and very well said. I mean, the initial sort of market talk firstly was about Neil Basu, but I think it would be hard for him to get the job, mainly because I don't think Priti Patel is going to go for it. And this is sort of a delicate balance between Patel on one side and Khan on the other. You're looking at the likes of Martin Hewitt, Mark Rowley, Ben Julian Harrington, I think, probably for your next commissioner. Baz Javid, possibly as well, although I think there would be an accusation of sort of undue insider influence if he was to get the job.
Yeah, I think that would. I can't really see that happening. I think that would be that would be a bit of an unforced error to do that.
I think it'd be a stretch. I mean, it's going to be a very tense situation. The Home Office aren't really happy about the way Dick was pushed out, but by Khan, they feel they didn't get enough advance notice. So that'll be interesting.
Last word to you, Neil.
Well, the thing I'm thinking about at the moment, because I'm such a junkie of by-elections, and this one in Birmingham, Edrington, is pretty dull, to be honest with you. Somebody had a grand at 50 to 1 on yesterday. That's about the only action there's been. That's Labour to win, replacing Jack Dromey, who suddenly and sadly died recently. But we now have, thanks to Neil Coyle and a drunken late-night outburst, we now have another independent MP. There are 8 currently people sitting as independents in the House of Commons, all with various, suspensions of the whip and, dodgy dealings and, somebody assaulted someone beat their wife up, somebody else is up in court for child abuse. There's all kinds going on. But not a by-election among them. I'm really gutted. I want to see some of these people, kicked out of the Commons so that we can have some more by-elections. That's what I'm looking forward to.
God, we really are an incredibly dull bunch of people.
Not a moment too soon. I don't normally, Johnson aside, go for MPs in the polling station, but my God, it will be a moment too soon. And I'm fully on the get Neil Coyle out train.
There you go. By-election junkies on the polling station. We'll be back next week.